Ready.
Yeah.
Morning, gents.
Good morning.
Auspicious
I'm
start.
retired. It's almost 11 o'clock, so
So yeah,
I'm going to have a beer.
Yeah, you fully are entitled to that. I'm not doing that because
I am convinced it's bad luck because every time we fail to open a can on the air, we've had problems, and so far we're already having electrical glitches. So
yeah, I got a little low voltage action going on at Matt's house.
as usual,
Yeah.
we'll see how my voice holds out today.
Well, that beer should help.
Yeah, I reading all about how to record vocals, speaking, singing, and all that stuff that we've all been through. This podcast does everything wrong. So, like, we just ate salty venison tenderloin with hatch pepper and
Right.
beer and everything else. And we found one of the coolest dudes I've ever met. It's Johnny Cappadonna. He's my neighbor. And
You got to tell the story of how you guys met.
How we met.
That is so funny.
My wife and I married, and I carried her across the threshold of this house when we bought it in 2001. And I had only met Fred and Lucy next door, and then the guy across the alley. And I hadn't met anybody else. I was working evenings, 4:30 p.m., 2:30 a.m. on patrol. And we were working inside the house. We just hadn't gotten out much. And this neighbor came over and he says, "Man, I don't know what's going on, but the old guy next door was taking pictures of your yard." And I thought, oh man, we got one of those. Because you imagine how many calls I've had to answer. Your grass is 2 inches too high for city code. And I thought, oh man, do I have an HOA, dude? And I ran into Johnny and we were talking, and I just said, "Hey, is there some kind of problem?" He goes, "No." He says, "You have a beautiful red yucca in the alley," and he said, I'm doing a painting of it. And I'm like, I'm going to like this guy. And then as time goes on, when I'm shining up my 19-foot sailboat, I see him pulling his big center console offshore rig bay boat. So, and you collect hobbies, right?
Oh, yeah. My wife says I'm a professional hobbyist.
I think to an extent that's something all three of us have.
That's why we're here. I mean, this is about guys that collect hobbies and don't necessarily do normal things. So,
well, that pretty much describes me because I don't usually do normal things. I mean, I do a lot of normal things, but a lot of them are kind of abnormal. I mean, harder to do than, like you guys, musicians. I mean, whether it be art or I used to make jewelry a long time ago. And when, we're making cabochons like most guys make, their grandpas make bolo ties or belt buckles or something. That wasn't good enough. I mean, I got to have the sparkly things, so I learned to facet.
Nice.
And
wow.
And you talk about tedious and time consuming. And for most people would probably be nerve-wracking because it's so, the slightest little too much pressure and you overcut a facet, and when you do that, you have to redo the whole stone.
So you enjoy the detail-oriented stuff, huh?
I do seem to.
Yeah, I'm like that too.
Way.
Well, I like to say I think there's a phrase that started with Cliff that if it's worth doing, it's worth going completely over the top. And I'll tell you, we're both purveyors of fine dogs. You had some little Boston Terriers, and at the time, fence, I could go and pet the dogs. And I watched your gardening endeavors slowly expand. Like I saw, a flower bed, and then some raised beds popped up, and then some shade structures, and then I hear a hydroponic watering system going off at 2:00 in the morning. And I'm like, yeah, I like this guy. And outdoor kitchen and everything else.
Yeah, things with me have a tendency to grow, and they're related, but sometimes it's not as obvious to some people as, it is to me. But the gardening got started because I enjoyed cooking. I got started cooking when I started working from home, self-employed, so I had, a flexible schedule, and my wife worked outside the home, and so she, was busy, and it was hard for her to come home and fix a meal and whatnot. And so I started, watching the Food Network and learning to cook and reading everything. And that's something that I think where, you find people that take it over the top. I mean, it's not good enough to read a couple. It's, I've probably read hundreds of books, and gave myself the equivalent of a culinary school education.
There you go.
I took online classes and, did things that, just really learned a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so the cooking took me to kind of the foodie movement, or, I don't know that a movement's a good description.
It's definitely a trend now, and I have no problem with it.
Yeah, the thing about it is you can only call being a foodie a trend to a certain point because you got to eat to live. You'll die if you don't. So you might as well make it as enjoyable and as much of a learning experience as possible.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I mean, and I think that's another thing is that people that are hobbyists tend to be learners.
Yeah.
They enjoy learning new things and experimenting with new things and just, you said gather hobbies, and, when we opened up, and that's true. I mean, I like to gather knowledge, and whether it be a hobby or it be food, which is food or photography or making jewelry or whatever it is. Just when I was making jewelry, I learned so much about gemstones. That most people don't know. But it's just stashed back there in the back of my mind, and someday I'll fish it out.
Right.
And that's kind of the way my things work. I've always liked to do things with my hands, and so the cooking's a natural. I like to build things. Of course, that's what I did as a profession. I was a contractor, an electrical subcontractor, but nevertheless, it's certainly a pretty integral part of my stuff.
I love watching your Facebook page. I was really impressed that all that back there you built and you constructed yourself.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah. That's amazing. What
that reminds me that I don't have my phone on silent. I don't want to ruin this podcast, so we're doing this.
So what's your favorite cooking style, category, nationality, anything?
I don't know that I really have a favorite, but, I'm Sicilian. I'm 100% Sicilian. My grandparents were immigrants. So, and growing up in Midland, Texas, there's not a lot of Sicilians floating around. So,
no.
It's not like you lived in the north end of Boston or you lived in Little Italy in New York or someplace where there's a lot of Italians, which usually clusters around ports of entry.
Mm-hmm.
And it just so happened that 3 of my 4 grandparents came in through New Orleans. My grandfather on my dad's side came in through Ellis Island in New York City, and it was just way too cold for him, so he moved south. And my grandmother and my 2 grandparents on my mother's side came in through New Orleans, and they settled in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And then my grandparents on my dad's side worked on a sugarcane plantation at Breaux Bridge, Louisiana, near Breaux Bridge, which is, dead in the heart of Cajun country.
Oh, yeah.
She learned to speak French before she learned to speak English. And so now, when they moved to Texas, they moved to Port Arthur, which is right on the border, and across the Sabine Lake is Louisiana, and Lake Charles and Louisiana and
Bridge City up to the north and all that.
Right.
And right there in that little cusp is it Texas or is it Louisiana?
And that's exactly right. All my dad's friends growing up were Thibodeau's, Mouton, or just down home Cajun folk.
Yep.
And so when they moved to West Texas in 1948, now there's no other Italians but my family.
Oh, wow.
Well, I say that. A very few. We had a neighbor lady down the street that was a war bride that was from Naples, I believe. And but so I lost most of my ethnic heritage because I can't speak Italian, and my grandparents didn't really. They demanded that their children speak English, not Italian. Now they spoke Italian between the old folks, but they made their kids all speak Italian, and they really were pretty
speak English.
They were adamant about their kids growing up as Americans.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
My grandmother never was a citizen. When she died, but I don't. Not because she didn't. She was as much a U.S. citizen as I am, but because of her education and whatnot, I think she was pretty intimidated about, the requirements, and of course nowadays she wouldn't be here. So,
right.
But nevertheless, so about the only little shred of my ethnic heritage is food.
And that makes sense.
And, those are things that they cling to. And
that's a huge part of Italian culture in particular is food. So do you do like a lot of Mediterranean style cooking, or is it more traditional northern style? Or
no, most of it's I would say Southern Italian, but some of it, sometimes I get northern, because like in Sicily and even southern Italy is kind of like the U.S.
It's hot. It's where the beaches are. It has sort of a different vibe to it.
It's not as cosmopolitan. Milan and north is banking and the sophisticated folk. Southern Italy was agrarian, and they were poorer, and they were very much like the South used to be in the old days. It was so that's why most of the Italian immigrants you see, not all, but most of them came from Southern Italy, from a lot of Calabrese and a lot of Sicilians.
Okay.
And but anyway, so. But they didn't have things like ovens in their homes, so you don't see things like baked pasta like lasagna.
Yeah. That makes sense. It also makes sense now that I think about it. They say if you can sing their last name, they're probably Italian.
Yeah.
Cappadonna, Kreitz, Vann.
Yeah. You can tell I'm just such a kraut, man.
My wife's family, they're German, and same thing. The grandparents would fight amongst themselves in German, but wouldn't teach the kids and all. But I got into Italian cooking in the Coast Guard. One of the things that I did in the Coast Guard was inspect ships as a security team. And we would go out to sea and board these ships that are coming into the ports and make sure everything was cool. This is during the, post 9/11. And they often fed us. We weren't supposed to eat. It's a, gratuity violation kind of thing. But I would rather face the Coast Guard when my chief is eating with me than tell some of these cooks, no, I don't want to eat your food. But we'd go on Italian boats, and it was always amazing. And there was a different vibe. You go on a Chinese boat, they put their food down in front of them, they choke it down in 5 minutes, pick up their dishes, clean their spot, and leave. The Italians, it was an event. It was their break. It was their social time. And it always had a style to it, even though they all buy their food at different ports across the world. So anyway, long way of getting around saying I got into Italian cooking, and then my wife has the green thumb, and she started bringing fresh vegetables, and everything was up a notch. So that definitely did it.
I read a book one time. No, it was a magazine article. It's an extended magazine article, and I can't remember where I read it, but they were talking about how incredibly important food and wine is to Italian culture, yet they don't make a huge big deal out of it. We make a big deal out of Rhone-style wines. We in America, we just go on and on superfluously about the complexity of these wines, and they're just like, hey, let's have some wine, But they center their fellowship around that stuff a lot more than we do. We eat in our cars. I mean, we have Thanksgiving dinner, and we do have food culture to an extent, but we, as Americans, even though we don't have the fellowship we used to have and community we used to have, we don't center it around food and drink the way the Italians historically have. And I think that, is one of the things that's helped them kind of keep their culture rich in a lot of ways. It's just because that's part of it.
And when I see you post a recipe or something like anybody else, if it's food, I just scroll past. John's page is 100% awesome original content every time, but it's an event. And even though it's something that I've ripped you off so many times when I see something.
All right, John, I'm friending you right now.
You got to. But your flowers are incredible. I've seen you had the flowers behind your house, and I saw the pictures and some of the stuff you're growing there I'd never even heard of.
And that's all part of the vegetable garden.
Okay.
I mean, you think, okay, this guy's growing flowers, but things are connected. And diversity in your yard helps your vegetable garden. If it's kind of like, most of our agriculture centers around monoculture where they plant a huge field because it's economically feasible. I mean, it's the way to produce a lot of food at one time, but there's vast quantities of corn, or even in California, lettuce fields or whatever in the valley in
date
Texas.
trees, yeah.
But in your backyard, where you're gardening for yourself, you have a lot of different. You have tomatoes and peppers and all these different things, and squash. Tomatoes and peppers don't really need insect pollinators because of the top plants they are. But squash is, on the other hand, and cucumbers have both male and female flowers on the same plant, but they require a pollinator, an insect pollinator, to move it from one to the other. Whereas a tomato has what's called a botanically perfect flower. It has the male and female flower parts in the same flower, and so they're in real close proximity to each other, and they self-pollinate real easy. So you don't really need a bee to pollinate your tomato or pepper plant, but you do need a bee to pollinate your squash plant. And there are lots of others, and cucumbers and watermelons. There's lots of them.
I never knew that.
Well, again, just knowing the garden's not good enough for me. I have to read the biology books or the botany books, So, anyway, in order to make better habitat for pollinators and natural predatory insects, they got to have a place to stay. That's missing in a monoculture, and that's why they have to use insecticides so much. I garden with no kind of, I do occasionally use an organic insecticide, but I even avoid that. I haven't ever used anything like pyrethrin, which is a pretty potent insecticide, although it's organic. But I might spray something with soap or soapy water and alcohol, or especially in a greenhouse, because insects can be a problem in a greenhouse because everything that plants like, insects like. And but when you plant a diverse garden and you include flowers, and I particularly like native flowers or wildflowers, and not all of them were native, but the ones in the back were all Texas natives, and it attracts a different set of pollinators. I could go out to those plants in the alley and find native bees, and whereas on the more, like poppies, for instance. I had a bunch of poppies, and they're beautiful. They're not native, but they work. They do attract pollinators, but mostly honeybees. And so it helps your garden in the long run. So, and it's fewer insecticides, and so the flower gardening is not just for aesthetics; it's also to provide
healthier, better
environment
for
your food production.
That's interesting.
We've seen my wife really stepped up her gardening game, and she's mixed flowers in with some vegetables and things like that. And we have all that English ivy, and we saw a lot of honeybees so far, more than usual, and hummingbirds and the other pollinators. So that's been pretty neat.
I've seen more honeybees this year for some reason. In fact, I got stung by a honeybee for the very first time in my entire life. I got stung by a bee. It got inside my motorcycle glove, and there's no telling how long it was there. And as I was taking my gear off, I must have done something with my glove, and it stung me. And I thought, wow, that hurts.
Yeah.
That's something I've never experienced before. And there was a little bee, and he had demised, and I thought, little honeybee, and I kind of felt bad because honeybees are such a good thing. You certainly don't want to contribute, and also speaking of, the sort of the bio status of honeybees is kind of precarious right now. And so anyway, but I thought to myself, I've never been stung by a bee, but I've seen more honeybees this year. And I started looking around the house, and I see more and more honeybees around my house. I probably picked him up at the house, rode with him all the way to the brewery with him in my glove or something, or on my sleeve or up my cuff or something like that, and got stung by him. Yeah, but I don't know why that is. For a long time they were just basically you'd have a lot of hornets and a lot of yellow jackets and stuff like that in my neighborhood, and especially around here. I never would see a lot of honeybees, and then I've been doing a lot of reading about sort of the honeybee crisis, and now it seems like they're showing up.
Yeah,
more
it's good.
And more. Yeah.
I got a wasp stung me on my face at the observatory a couple of weeks ago.
Oh.
I wasn't paying attention, and there was a fresh nest that I didn't see anyway. Popped me, but fortunately, I'm not allergic.
I thought to myself,
you found that out.
Yeah, I thought to myself, well, 49 years, never been stung by a bee. I guess I'm about to figure out if I'm allergic or not. And nothing happened. It just hurt for a couple of days. And I talked to Bill, who's been on the podcast, Bill Martin, our longtime friend, and he's a tactical paramedic. And he said that if you are allergic to it, I told him the story. He said, you may not know the first or maybe even the second time you get stung. But the second, third, fourth time, all of a sudden, if you have an allergy, you now have enough you've had enough in your system to kick off the allergens.
Yeah, it's collective or...
Yeah, it's cumulative maybe, or it takes a little time for your...
Dude, all the crap in my bloodstream, it probably killed the wasp.
Well, and that's one difference. A honeybee can sting you one time and it's dead.
Right.
Because it pulls its stinger out, where a wasp can sting you multiple times.
Yeah.
And wasps are generally more aggressive. Most honeybees are not that aggressive,
right.
And you have to almost do something like sit on one or stick in your glove or something
Exactly.
in order for it to sting you, with the exception of the Africanized bees, which we all know are real aggressive. But and something you may not know is that honeybees are not native. They were brought over with colonists.
Oh, wow.
Really?
Yeah, and they're ubiquitous now because they've naturalized to the U.S. and North America, and so now they're all over. Of course, we also, the agricultural industry transports hives, to places like when, almonds or whatever are blooming, they'll truck in hundreds of millions of bees and set the hives up in the fields and collect pollen, and it's kind of a symbiotic thing. I mean, it does the bees good, but it also pollinates those plants.
I had no idea.
But those are plants like that we were talking about that have to have an insect pollinator in order to survive or to produce fruit. But we do have native bees that are native to the U.S. and to Texas. We have leafcutter bees and carpenter bees and all those bees are solitary. They don't live in hives. They live in the ground. The only native bee I know offhand that's colonial is a bumblebee.
Okay.
And they don't live in hives. They live in hives in the ground. But there may be like 50 bees, but there won't be hundreds of thousands of bees.
So I don't know the answer to this. Do only certain species of bees make honey or make honeycomb?
Yes.
Okay.
Honeybees
are the ones.
Are the ones
okay.
that make the honey. Now, native bees collect pollen and nectar, and they make it into a dough. And when they lay an egg in a nest, which is usually either a hole in the ground or a cavity like a mason bee finds a cavity in a rock, or a hole in your brick, or a carpenter bee will chew into wood, or find an old insect hole in same thing with leafcutter bees. In my backyard, I have I call them bee blocks. They're just pieces of wood with holes in them, and the holes are deep, and they go in those holes and they lay an egg, and then they line the interior of the hole with a leaf that they cut, and then they lay an egg in it, and they deposit that dough from that they gather from made from pollen and nectar. It's not honey, but they deposit that dough in there with the egg, and then they seal it, and then they do another chamber until they fill up that hole. And then they're later on in the spring, the bees hatch and they chew their way out. Now, this is something that's interesting, is that the bees that were the last laid have to be the first ones to hatch. Otherwise, the one in the back chews through all its siblings.
Wow.
I mean, and
so you better hope the runt.
You better hope the guy. And I don't recall which it is, but I can't remember if it's the males or the females that hatch first. I think the males, maybe the ones at the front, and the females are at the back, and it might be the reverse of that. But
wow.
But they hatch in reverse order of the way they're laid. Now, don't ask me how they figure that out.
That's neat.
That's fascinating to me. Yeah.
But those are, I mean, it's cool things with native bees. I mean, and there's hundreds of native bees. There's lots of different kinds. I was looking right now is a good time, because anything that's blooming, because most of the bloom's gone. Most of the wildflower blooms are gone. But like I have some Chinese chives back there, and they're full of those white blooms, and the bees just love them. And I was out there a minute ago, and it looked like I was spotting honeybees, but I also noticed there were two tiny little native bees flying around, buzzing around. So, and you'll find sweat bees that are green metallic. They're beautiful. I mean, there's a lot of different kind of bees. But it's funny that that the honeybees that we all know and love and think and are vital to our agriculture, but they're not native.
One of my favorite. I've seen them here, but mostly around lakes, and we sail at just a little Oak Creek all the time. And we about this time of year, late summer into fall, little spot where we've been anchored in a cove. We wake up in the morning and we're drinking coffee, and the cabin fills with cactus flies, or the little hover flies. They're metallic green.
Oh, yeah.
And they're big, and they just hover. They don't sting, they don't bite, they don't annoy. They're just hanging in space. They're just, and it's funny because the boat will take a rock, and we'll be sitting here drinking coffee, and just and the bug, you're moving up and down, but the little bug is just hanging out in that one spot. So yeah, they're beautiful to watch while we're sitting there morning. But that's cool. And I know we need to keep moving, because you've got a ceramics class,
you
right?
Need to guide me back, because I got off into the sticks.
No, we're doing fine. I like I said, I want to make you late for your ceramics class. You're taking on some new art. How's that working out so far? Other than the registration process, I can completely relate to.
Yeah, the registration process was kind of tedious, but it's hard to tell.
Is it?
I mean, the one thing that's I'm sure of is that it's fun. So, you guys as artists, I mean, that's another one of my hobbies, Tim, is I draw and paint.
Yeah,
that's where we're going. Yeah,
we're going with that. Yeah.
And it's another one of those things. It takes a long time to learn how to do it, and we were talking about this in the alley the other day, and about talent, and I think you guys can relate to this, because I mean, as musicians, you're dealing with it all the time. And oftentimes, I mean, sometimes I'll post a photo of one of my paintings on Facebook or something, and I'll get a reaction in it, and it's intended, and it is very complimentary. And people will go, "Oh, you're so talented," and I think to myself, "You have no idea that I'm not near as talented as maybe what you think." Yeah, I can produce a pretty convincing image, but it took me a while to get there.
Right.
Now, drawing is something that is something you can learn to do. Anyone can learn to do, and learn to do it better if you have the right coaching. I mean, but then talent kicks in somewhere, and there are certainly more talented musicians than others, and there are certainly more talented artists, visual artists, but anyone can enjoy art.
Yeah.
Even if you don't have to be good at it to enjoy it. And so getting back to my ceramics, I mean, I certainly don't feel like I'm good at it by any means yet, because like anything else, when you get into it, it's harder than it looks.
Yeah,
exactly. And we're just starting in the basics, I mean, making a pinch pot and a coil pot. But I have two sisters that are both artists, and my oldest sister passed away in 2011. And she, well, actually both of them, I mean, are talented artists.
Talented. I know what you mean when you kind of use the quote, air quotes on talented.
They were artists from the get-go, from childhood. And my oldest sister is actually, her work's in the textbook we use in class.
Oh, wow.
Ceramics. And she's won some very prestigious awards. My other sister, who I would tell you is every bit as talented, and actually, I mean, she can do it all. I mean, she can draw, she can paint, she can do ceramics, she does sculpture, and she's in my ceramics class.
Wow.
And so that's one of the great things about a community college, is that people like us can do. I go out there. I took drawing and painting and design, but I probably took 80, 100 hours.
Uh-huh.
Wow.
And, and sometimes it was the same class, same group of people. And that's kind of the way that a lot of the ceramics classes are too. A lot of the art classes in general are that way, because there's a lot of people like me that it's great because it sets aside the time to go do it. If I say, well, kind of like me, the last couple of years, I've not drawn or painted anything. Been busy gardening.
Mm-hmm.
And I sure could have taken a few hours out of my schedule and sat down and done a sketch or done this or that, but I didn't. So now it's really nice having that class that says, okay,
it keeps you structured in your endeavor.
It makes you go. It makes you take the time out, because you know that you're scheduled for a class, and it's great fun, and the people are great. The instructors are great. I mean, I love the instructors out there at Midland College. They're all good at what they do, and they're pleasant to be around, and the people in the classes are usually pleasant to be around, because they're doing what they want to do.
Yeah.
And that was something else that you mentioned the other day, about being a hobby, whatever it is. It's typically something you want to do. Mm-hmm. So you have the right attitude going in.
One of my downfalls in life is that I've developed so many interests that I wanted to do them for a living, and I've managed to do most of that. Art is one of those things. I worked in advertising for about 15 years, and I still do a lot of, it's now more multimedia development. People don't really have a call for traditional media art like they used to. Every once in a while, I will you've got the program for the
Blues Fest,
for the Blues Fest, for 16. So I was the featured artist for that year. We were performers. We were featured performers for that festival, and I was the featured artist. So I was real honored by that. But there's not a huge call for that anymore professionally. It's all graphic art and design work. And so going back to what you said about talent and putting it in air quotes. I just figured out along the way that if I liked something, I was going to put in the hours to figure out how to do it. Now, I've failed at a few things. There have been a few things that I really wanted to do and be good at that I just absolutely sucked at. But generally speaking, I think talent does belong in air quotes to a degree because it's more about putting in the hours to learn how to do it. And there's a really great book by Malcolm Gladwell called Outliers that talks about that very thing. He talks a lot about the 10,000 hour rule and how bands who got really, really good and took over the world, not only did they have a modicum of talent, but they had the right connections. They knew the right people, and they responded positively to those connections. They weren't jerks, or they knew how to have good, strong relationships with people. And then on top of that, they put in the hours to get good at what they were doing. The Beatles is one of the bands that he talks about. Yeah. He talks about, he takes it over to hockey in Canada, how, certain players are outliers and certain players aren't, and how all of that fits together. It's a fascinating book. You being a reader like us, you would enjoy that book if you've never read it before.
Well, I think most of the really good artists that I know are super dedicated, and that's absolutely exactly what you were saying. I mean,
nice save.
Sorry, I was playing with the coaster.
But it's that dedication, and like you said, that had a lot to do with your attitude going in.
Yeah, and I think I've faced a couple of times when you have to say this is the end of it, and I had to quit golf because
me too. Golf was one of mine. Yeah,
I wanted to play golf so badly. The men in my family all played it, and they were the kind of guys that may not play for a couple of years, and somebody says, "Hey, white guys are in town. Let's go." And they go, and they can play reasonably well and have a good time. I never got that good. 2 semesters in college, I never could. I finally got to the point where I hated the thought of it.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm giving it up.
I always tell people I used to play golf, but I really decided that I enjoyed being a happy person instead.
Yeah. I just couldn't. I'm one of the guys, I know how to train. If you I know how to learn a sport. I know how to learn a physical thing. Price Corder is Midland College's golf instructor for a long time, one of the pros here. Really good guy. He did his best.
Yeah.
I mean, everything. I had to quit fencing because of injury. Sometimes you just got to say quit. I stopped competitive shooting just because as much as I enjoyed it, it got to the point where it's hard to imagine just being tired of shooting. It's, when you get to the end of the day, or, when I was firearms instructor and SWAT and all that.
It makes sense.
And all this is done.
I've burned out on music before.
Well, and you come home and you're ready for a weekend, and you got to get up at 5:30 in the morning to drive to Pecos for a match or whatever, finally. But you know what I still love to do? Is I love to drag out my race gun. That M1 I had out here is one of them. And sling up in my jacket and punch some paper. I like the discipline. Now, I do miss the competition because I was good at it, but at the same time, and one of the things I do now, just kind of in celebration of all that, I bought a match air rifle, 17 caliber. I got it from Civilian Marksmanship Program for $100, rebuilt, and I started shooting 10 meter in my garage. And it is 90% the satisfaction of match shooting. But there are times I think you got to throw in the towel.
I can really relate to that on both of you guys.
Does anyone need another?
I'm good.
I'm good too. Is that I totally suck at golf, and I had to give it up as well. I mean, it was like, and I'm not noted for my fine temperament to begin with. and I've mellowed a lot. I mean, as I got older, and you're a granddad, and you've been through 3 kids, and Michael kind of took a lot of the rough edges off. He claims credit for that, and some of it's due because he worked at it.
Yeah.
But kidding aside, I mean, and I was a pretty good athlete too. I mean, back in the day, I know it's hard to that's
the way it was for me too. I thought to myself, hey, I'm good with all kinds of stuff that have to do with hand-eye coordination. I shot competition archery for about a year at one point and did pretty well at it. And I thought, hey man, I'm going to pick up this golf thing. I was working as a graphic artist for this publishing company, and all the salesmen played golf. Come on, Tim, come play golf with us. So that's where it all started back around 94, 95. And I stuck with it for like 4 years, and finally, I still have the clubs. They're out in my shed covered in dust. One of them's broken from a fit of rage.
Well, maybe there's other people that are possibly as temperamental as myself. Yeah. I don't recall ever breaking any.
No, I
threw a few.
Throwing it is how I broke it. Yeah.
I've done that.
Yeah, so it's just kind of one of those things. One of the things that frustrates me about deciding that I'm passionate about something and wanting to learn it is not being that's like, I don't know, it's like this failure thing. I'm real sensitive to when I want to get good at something and I can't get really good at it, I start getting frustrated. But there's certain things that I'm still not good at that I like enough that I haven't quit yet. Disc golf is the perfect thing. That's a perfect example. I'm not good at disc golf, but I still enjoy playing it so much that I still will play it.
But the thing is, if we all went out and said, hey, let's go play a round, we're going to go play nine pins in disc golf, that I could hand Johnny 3 and we would have a decent day. It's one of those kind of games. I put in pastimes for when I retired. One of the things I always wanted to get some skill at was bowling. It's a stupid game. It's local. There's plenty of places to do it. And I'm not great, but I'm not horrible at the same time. Now, my problem and the reason I'm not, it's the same thing I face in music and in virtually everything but shooting, is I'm a hot, cold guy. There are nights, we're on a tour or whatever, that Tim would look and he'd go, yeah, I know Matt's probably not going to be on it. Like I didn't sleep enough or whatever. I would have a cold day. And the better you are, the more professional you are, the slot between the hot and the cold days, So, a pro bowler might be between, 1 and 3 points on a hot and cold day. Whereas me could be 50, who knows, I could throw in the wrong damn lane. But
it's funny you mentioned it. I mean, because in my collection of hobbies, I also shot. I competitive shot.
You did
cowboy.
Yeah.
Well, I actually started way back when I'm in my 20s shooting what they call practical pistol.
Yeah.
Did you ever know Mike Ashcroft? He was a DPS helicopter pilot.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Well, he and I shot back in the. I mean, we were just. He was probably a patrolman back in those days. But anyway, we shot with them doing that. And then later on, we were cowboy shooters together.
I remember that.
And that's when I probably was more devoted to that than any of them. I shot handgun silhouette. I shot skeet a little bit in a tournament type skeet because I'm really a pretty bad shotgun shot. But it really improved my hunting skill. But I shot cowboy a lot. And I got pretty good at it. And I was never a world champion, but I was enough to keep them honest. I was good enough to keep the world champions honest.
And enjoy it.
And enjoy it, and still enjoy it. And then my mom got sick, and I got off into other things. And I was about the time I got involved in art. And it's something that you mentioned a while ago that's probably a fault of mine. And that is when I get to the point that I get pretty good at something, I oftentimes will put it down and move to something else. And that's kind of where I'm at with painting and drawing. And I won't say I won't ever do it again but now I moved to ceramics. And but I have a way of things coming back I mean,
I'm going through some of that myself right now. But you talked about, putting it down once you get good at it or having had explored it pretty thoroughly. I did that with ham radio, and now I'm coming back to ham radio. I did that with rocketry. Now I'm coming back to rocketry.
And I don't want to interrupt. I better get this out before.
That was it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I knew you were done. I don't want to interrupt anybody, but I get this thought out beforehand. I'll encounter people who will say, "Oh, so you're into rockets now? Oh, so you're into gardening now? Like, what's it going to be next?" Almost like it's a bad thing.
Yeah,
right. You get that, and
it's not a bad thing. It's about.
It's not. It's not.
If you're compelled as a lifelong learner, it's always going to be something because your mind is always wanting to gather knowledge and develop new skills. It's something I think that's just inherent in some people. I think the three of us are perfect examples.
Yeah. One of my friends, it's Clint Galloway. He was my boss back in the 90s. And we were talking about something. And he compared anything involving entertainment. He said he compared the monetary value to a movie. So in the example was, at the time, a movie cost about as much as a couple of boxes of ammo. And he said by the time he loads up, goes out to the range with his buddies and shoots, he considers it money well spent because it's, hey, it's as good as going to see a good movie. So he compared that to movies. And when you compare the things that we're talking about to movies, you don't watch the same movie every day for 50 years. Some people do. We call those one hobby guys, and they're scary people. But you come around because, you like, hunting, obviously, for the most part, seasonal. And disc golf, you may not want to play in the hot summer. You'll maybe go to your drawing or your indoor stuff, and you kind of rotate around. And I try to pick things that can sit, that maybe I have to replace a battery or something like that, and pick up decades later. I'm doing one of my retirement goals was to learn instinctive archery, and so picked up a bow and started shooting again. So it's just.
He's drawn me into that too. The other night we were in his backyard we did a podcast, and then for an hour and a half we were just back there shooting recurve bows in his backyard. I was like, dude, I gotta go, man.
But I do enjoy the learning. Now my wife, that's a different matter, and this is the other thing I wanted to talk about before we is my wife and Tim's wife, and I've met your wife a few times and had very few conversations with her, but our wives are almost the same person. And
it's scary.
Yeah, we joke that we have to get them together every once in a while to socialize them. That way they don't start biting people if we take them to the park, because they're both very quiet, very solitary people. Nicole was a high school and college athlete, and she ran track. And Nicole has to be good at something, a sport or whatever, or it sucks, or it's, And I have to say she's taking bowling like a champ because she's having trouble with it, but she's having good days and bad days. But we go, and she orders a Caucasian from the bar and sits back, and we manage to have a good time. So how do your wives fit in and deal with all this?
Oh, mine, tolerance, I would say. Jane and I are a lot different, but she enjoys the garden. And a matter of fact, maybe she won't see this, but this morning she went with a friend to pick some black-eyed peas out over in Stanton, and they came back early. And when I expanded my garden this last time, and I built the greenhouse, and then I doubled or tripled the size of my raised beds and everything. And my wife said, "That's fine, you do this, but remember, that's your garden. I like gardening. I don't want to be a farmer."
Right.
So I'm like, well, okay. It's not like, it's like I do all the heavy lifting. She does help, but so this morning she comes in with her friend, and they come in the front door, and I'm sitting there. It's just moments before this podcast, and they come in, and then her friend says, "Jane wants to show me her garden." And she probably wondered what that look on my face was. I didn't say anything. I kept it zipped. I was wise. But, I mean, what was going through my head? Oh, so it's your garden now.
I love it. I love it.
So, and she has warmed up to it. Yeah. And she just recently retired too, so it's good, and she has more time, and I think that has a lot to do with it because she's helping me out, and her job and my granddaughter are the harvesters. They like to go out and pick, and Jane's favorite thing is to give it away.
Yeah,
and it is satisfying to give people produce or whatever. And but I mean, sometimes I'm like,
she gave me some tomatoes. Yeah, they were.
To me, that's kind of a special gift. Anytime somebody has a garden and they give me something, like Bill or anybody who has a garden or Cliff, that's kind of a special thing. That, man, you put a lot of work into growing this, and even though it was literally a labor of love, you wanted me to have some of it. That's a friendship thing. That's a culture. That's a positive culture thing in its own way.
This may really. Because I really do get in the sticks. I was an anthropology major in college.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And there's an anthropologist, a Harvard anthropologist, who wrote a book called Catching Fire, and it's about cooking, and it's about the importance of cooked food to humans from a physiological standpoint. In other words, I don't know, you have to follow with me because way back in the long time ago, there was about 800,000 years ago, there was a creature called Homo erectus.
Homo erectus.
And Homo erectus was a hominid, which is the group that includes apes and humans, but anyway, they're the ones that started cooking food over a fire. And all of a sudden, there was this huge expansion of brain cavity size. And his contention is that because when you consume raw food, it takes literally all your time chewing. Now, this sounds funny, but if you look at a gorilla or a chimpanzee, even a gorilla, if you look at a gorilla skull, they have a ridge right down the middle of their skull called a sagittal crest. And it's for the attachment of jaw muscles because they eat vegetable matter.
They're constantly chewing.
And they're constantly chewing. Mm-hmm. They spend all their waking hours chewing. And when you cook food, it's easier to digest. And then when you start including meat and protein in it, it just, because your brain is just a really energy consuming organ. Mm-hmm. And that allowed, in his theory, is it allowed humans to become human. But the cool thing to me about it, it's also from a cultural standpoint, it's the point at which really sharing and culture could really become, because if you came,
it was a conduit to forming societies and cultures.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so as a professional beer brewer, I've studied a little bit of the anthropological history of beer brewing, and a lot of anthropologists tend to think that one of the main reasons humans stopped being so nomadic and started to settle down and become more agricultural was so that they could make wine and beer. And they feel like it probably happened by accident in the beginning, like some grapes accidentally fermented, and they drank the juice or ate the grapes and got a little drunk and thought this is kind of cool.
Not that bad.
Mm-hmm. Or they had some grain in a jar or some kind of a vessel. It got wet. It fermented. It smelled kind of good. They ate the grain or drank the water. Got a little drunk, and they thought, you know what? Let's grow a field of this because this is kind of cool. And so that also facilitated the design of societies and the building of cultures outside of nomadic cultures.
Well, and along the lines of what you're saying, when you're cooking, that's kind of sort of a means of preservation. You don't have to eat it right then before it's rancid. You can cook and dry and all that. So I'm starting to see a means of stockpiling food and not having to constantly hunt, gather, and eat,
and that develops all the other thing. That's where art starts to happen. The more leisure time, one of the good sides and downsides of the modern Western culture that we live in is that we have so much free time that everybody does some kind of art now. Everybody's making movies. Everybody's taking pictures. Everybody's doing paintings.
Cheesy podcasts.
Everybody's doing podcasts. Everybody on the planet has a podcast right now. And so that it's not a bad thing, but it's contributed to the fact that we're probably the most entertained generations of humans ever.
It's got some downside.
It does have.
Oh yeah,
no doubt. There's no doubt. It's a double-edged sword for sure.
It is because, and it's as you guys were talking. I mean, I'm thinking about the history of grains. And there are even some anthropologists that go so far as to claim that the reason that agriculture got started in the first place was to grow grains to make beer or a fermented type of drink or food. But and the fact is that bread is the same way. Now, when bread and beer making are just go hand in. I mean, they're almost the same thing.
Flüssiges Brot is what is the German term for beer, liquid bread.
And
virtually everything in bread is in beer, and vice versa.
Yeah, and see what you said about preserving. Well, bread is a way to preserve that grain. Of course, grain is something that you can harvest and store, and that leads to ceramics and to cooking and to all these things. And it's kind of funny because right now, I mean, I've got all these things that are really intertwined. I mean, I'm working toward the ceramics thing now, and the reason is because I want to build some functional stuff to cook with.
That'd be fantastic.
See, it all ties in.
I love it.
And our wives all put up with it. My wife literally puts up and has put up with my pursuit of all these different interests over the past. We've been married for 25 years, and we dated and went through college for, we're basically high school sweethearts. So she knows me very well at this point. One of my downsides is that I always joke she's worked at the same place for 29 years and I've had 29 jobs. That's an exaggeration, but one of my things is that if I really love something and I've gotten good at it, I always try to figure out a way to make money at it. I was on the road touring with national bands for years as a musician. I loved motorcycles, so I became a motorcycle safety instructor. I loved brewing beer, and so I became a professional beer brewer. I loved art, so I worked in advertising. It's been one of those things where that's been a double-edged sword in and of itself too. But I've figured out a way to make money at all of that stuff over these years.
I didn't want to deal with all that. I mean, I tried passions as jobs, and it didn't work for me.
It doesn't.
I did aviation and worked in it, and it kind of took some of the luster. Mm-hmm. But what's worked with me and my wife, it's been criticized. We've been around people. I remember a lady, we were talking about a motorcycle tour or whatever, and she looked at Nicole and said, "Wow, you really indulge him." And Nicole does what Nicole wants to do. She keeps aquariums. She reads. She's an artist, and she keeps a garden, and that's it. But Nicole is I say she's kind of a passenger in life, and she loves to get in the car, take her shoes off, put her feet on the dash, and say, "Where are we going? Let's do something cool." And I'm the guy that wants to say, "Dude, you got to see this place. Let's go." And so that's kind of created a symbiotic thing.
Sharon and I, when I say that Sharon and Nicole were separated at birth, that's probably true. Yeah. Because Sharon's the same way. She wants to go do something and have an adventure, but she knows that I'm good at creating adventures. So, I'm sort of the conduit to her getting to the adventure, and it's always worked out perfectly for us.
Yeah, we're different than that, but and Jane, we more often than not go off and do our own thing. I mean, Jane likes to travel, and she likes to, and I've enjoyed it some, but I'm really pretty much a homebody. But I will say that Jane has indulged my hobbies in the years, and she's been kind enough to say, "Well, Johnny is intense." And I really like the sound.
Yeah.
I
That's
like
good,
the
yeah.
sound of that because
You're a Renaissance man.
Well,
That's,
other people will say that. I have had people say that, and I guess it's true from some degree because there's hardly anything I'm not interested in. But the saying that I'm intense is a kind way of saying that I go over the deep end, But
it's worth doing. It's worth going over the top.
and that's exactly the way I am. I mean, when I get into, it's like I'm the guy that doesn't want to just know what time it is. I want to know how to make a watch.
Right.
And if I'm gonna learn how to cook and I'm gonna make bread, I want to know. I mean, just like with brewing. I mean, how cool is it that you can make something that tastes so good out of three things: flour, water, and salt, and that's all there is in straight French bread if you naturally leavened it with the yeast. But you were talking about grapes and how that. I mean, I can really see how that could accidentally happen with grapes because the
Yeast grows on the outside of the grape. Yeah.
That's that frosty looking stuff you see on the outside of a grape is yeast. Same thing with plums or a lot of fruits. Well, and grains have you don't see it like you do on grapes, but the same stuff clings. It's everywhere. And so you can start your own natural
I could do an entire podcast just on Zymergy, just because I'm so fascinated with yeast as organisms and how they create wine and beer and cider and how they do it and why they do it and there are all these weird things that happen with yeast. I won't talk about it because this would just take us off the rails. Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what it would do.
Yeah, to non-brewers. Yeah, I learned two things when as a young man. First of all, by marrying an artist, I expected to live in like a really cool Art Deco house with. Now, that means you're living with somebody that suffers for months to create something they're going to hate. That's what that means. And then I thought, cool, I now have all these friends that are brewers. Man, I'm going to have absolutely nothing but the cool spirit. That means you drink beer with chemists. That's what they talk about when they drink. So, but no, one of the greatest compliments my wife ever paid, she said, you and your buddies, you guys are Renaissance men. To the bone. And, the other thing I was going to come back to, all these things that we're talking about, we recorded a podcast, like Tim said, and we went out and we were shooting bows back there. I've accumulated a few target bows, and we're out there just throwing arrows at this target. And I thought, how many thousands of years have people done this?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
I mean this is how many times? Yeah,
it's a connection back. It's not always about moving your knowledge forward. It's about moving your knowledge into the past and understanding why you're who you are based on who you came from.
Which takes me to one of my favorite pieces of your art is an unnatural history. I love that piece.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
see, that's
tell me about that piece. I'm going to put up a picture of it here. I love it.
Well, it's a pen and ink, but it's just a very simple drawing. Matter of fact, I took a drawing class, and I probably took it 20 times, so they basically just let me do whatever I wanted. And most of the time I painted. But every once in a while I'd feel a little guilty and thought, well, I just really need to do a hardcore drawing, just a drawing. So and I admit it, I'm a tree hugger. I mean,
we all hug trees in our own way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's whatever. And I mean, I'm not an eco-terrorist. I'm a hunter.
This,
and, you talked
this
about
is a place.
with the
This is a
past, but-
place for the politically homeless.
Yes.
we're all there.
You strike me as sort of a Teddy Roosevelt type in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do kind of.
I mean, Teddy Roosevelt was an avid hunter and sportsman, but at the same time, he started the national park system to
That's
preserve.
right. Yeah.
He was an avid conservationist, but and he's a character that a lot of dualism. So
Yes.
anyway, I mean, I can get off in the art sticks here, but it's just, we were talking about agriculture and whatnot having a downside, because it's a two-edged sword, and it's what made civilization possible, but it's also what made all the bad things that go along with it possible.
Yep.
Right.
And so, and that's really what that's about. I mean, because this piece has me, a self-portrait looking across the earth at a chimpanzee, and our world is just massively expanding, almost like a bad growth, and his world is shrinking, and it's just looking in his eyes and saying, I didn't mean for this to happen this way, but it's.
I respect that, and I have thought a lot about just that line of consciousness, especially over the past 10 years here in West Texas. One of the things I always loved about living out here growing up is that you had some civilization. I mean, you had, some of the perks of living in a big city, but it was this quiet place where there weren't a lot of people, where you kind of could go out and find a place by yourself, and there was a lot of stuff that was undisturbed and untouched. That's going away. I'm believe me, I'm a capitalist, baby. I'm pro free markets, and I'm pro industriousness. I believe one of the four legs of the founding of the country that the founders all agreed on is that we must have industriousness in order for the republic to survive. But at the same time, I see things like Britt and I rode our motorcycles out to Imperial Sand Hills a few months back. They are mining that sand now to frack with it.
Yeah.
And it is what it is, and I'm not going to speak against it, but those dunes are ancient, man.
There's a downside.
Yeah.
Those dunes are ancient, and they're beautiful, and they're being mined. I don't know, honestly. I don't know how I feel about that. I have cognitive dissonance over that.
Absolutely.
I hate that the whole debate is so politicized that you can't say how you feel about one thing or another, when in reality, whether you are a super hardcore science atheist or the most devout Christian, whether you're dirt poor or rich, you have to be a good steward of your world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we've somehow turned that into this just political circle jerk.
Punditry.
It's the political polarization that's taking place all over, and I think that's probably one of the worst things that's happened to the U.S. in general, is that polarization. Because maybe we're a little, I told you I'm a tree hugger, but I also grew up here out in West Texas, and sometimes I think, if ever there was a place to do the drilling, this might be it. I mean, yes, there were, but we're facing the downside too. I mean, just like what you said. Yeah. I mean, it has a cost.
Yeah. There's an invasiveness to it. So, not to make this a political conversation, but I think that one of the worst things we've done as a society modernly here in America is that we have allowed political and religious differences to a lesser degree, but mainly political differences, to keep us from becoming friends and creating relationships with people.
One of the most important things, and it's one of the things that it's hard on Facebook sometimes, is that it's just being civil. I mean, I can disagree with you, and I can certainly allow you your opinion. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
No.
And, and some people on both ends of the spectrum, especially the political spectrum, get all bent out of shape with that. And, maybe it's because most of the people I know grew up out here in West Texas are pretty conservative. While I don't necessarily, I'm probably in the minority when it comes to a lot of things. But again, I want to keep it what we started with was hobbies. I mean, but the truth is,
it ties in.
I think people who do what we do, I think you're in a privileged position of seeing a lot of things, and add to that my career and the things that I've seen and done and had to do. I find it, I can't snap a chalk line to either to political ideology. In one day, two of the most horrifying things I had heard come out of people's mouths, one came out of a hardcore liberal and the other out of a hardcore conservative. Right. It just shows absolutely no compassion or love for people. It was more about hate for a particular thing. And I think if we all kind of dug into a little bit more knowledge, a little bit more experience, and the environmental thing is huge, because people have taken this and turned it into something polarizing, and you can't say one thing. I mean, I was talking about Facebook. A guy was talking about earthquakes and fracking, and he was a very smart person who didn't understand geology and was completely wrong in what's causing the earthquakes. And I explained what actually caused it, collapsing the salt, collapsing underground collapses that were causing the tremors with the frac, and it's actually saltwater disposal.
Right.
Collapsing.
Right.
Rattled some windows. And this guy was saying, no, this drilling is lubing the tectonic plates, and they're, I'm like, no, you can't do that. But anyway, point being, if you have to do it from a position of that political, religious thing, it's
just going to make it harder for you to communicate. Yeah. And if you are interested in finding something called the truth, I'm real careful with that word truth. I think there are empirical truths, and especially as a person who is always interested in learning something new, as we all are, I recognize that there are empirical truths. We can agree that you're wearing a gray shirt with red graphics on it, that sort of thing. But there are also personal truths. And you have to be careful with your personal truths, because that's where you can put yourself in a position to not be able to communicate with somebody.
I have also been ridiculed for wearing this shirt because it says West Texas Public Radio.
Yeah.
Which means I'm a communist.
Ah.
Now.
and we've played multiple shows to
I will
raise
tell you
money
the reason.
For, yeah.
I will tell you the reason was they gave me this shirt after they hired me to play a gig for them.
We played several years.
Empirical truth.
Right. And that's another thing where you can turn your mind off. Well, no, we don't support public radio. They take public funds. Well, you know what? We played these shows to help raise money for West Texas Public Radio to make it more independent, and so hopefully it needs less of that. There are more than one facet to all this stuff, and if you approach anything monolithically, you're never going to truly understand it.
Blammo.
And understanding is, that quest for knowledge is what it's all about for me.
And that's it. That's the whole.
And that's kind of the whole subject of the podcast.
The quest for knowledge. Collecting hobbies is about the quest for knowledge.
It's about collecting knowledge.
Yeah, as Johnny and I were talking the other day, and we'll wrap up here, but nothing stops you in this world if you see something you've always wondered about it, no matter how crazy it is. If you always want to know, I think what started me down the whole path of all this just now occurred to me was my stepfather, who bought me a boomerang. West Texas, he brought home a boomerang because I'd seen one on, Looney Tunes, and he said, no, those are real, and they'll come back. He said, but you got to throw them just right. And he used to make them when they were kids, and he brought me. How many people do you know in West Texas had a boomerang?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were few and far between. And I'm
like, holy hell, this is a real thing. And it's in my hand, and I learned how to throw it, and I can still throw a boomerang, and I think I have 3 of them. Mm-hmm. And so all that's reality, and you can make it yours. You can get online, and I think, I don't know if I told you about it, or it was a conversation I had with Tim, but I was online, and I was Googling. I needed knocks, arrow knocks, right? And I was looking for those to throw on an Amazon order. In 2019, you can get on Amazon.com and order a Mongolian horse bow. I'm going to let that soak in a minute.
I like everything about the way that sounds.
A bow that Mongolian warriors use to shoot from a horse.
Mm-hmm.
It's $89 to get to your house in 2 days. We're limitless now.
Amazon Prime, here I come.
Right. So I'm just saying it's all out there. We don't have to, and we're gonna have you back on because I want to hear about your photography and such. But in the days before the internet, what it took to make something like that happen was phenomenal compared to what it is today.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and I'm, I said that created some of the bad things, but then, well, I'm the first guy that goes to Amazon because I need something I can't find.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it's all there.
And it's there. I mean, and it's freaking incredible.
Yeah. It is absolutely amazing. And there's a bad side to it. It's worse than, Walmart and small businesses and things like that and in the grand scheme of things. But at the same time, holy hell.
It is really convenient.
Yeah.
I mean, and it opens up, just like what you said, it opens up just a whole new territory to people like us. I mean, Midland, I don't know how big Midland is now, but, cooking. Try to go out and find Korean red pepper flakes. You're not. Well, I mean, maybe we have 3 Asian markets now, so maybe, but I haven't been able to find. So Amazon, like you said, 2 days they're here.
Yeah. Well, I was the same way, and on cooking stuff. I read an article on Turkish coffee.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I gotta try this, but where do I get Turkish ground coffee and an e-brick to brew it in?
To the internet.
To Amazon. And I've been making Turkish coffee ever since. In the wintertime, there is nothing better than Turkish coffee. And I learned something. I learned something about another culture. I've had a food product that I'd never had before. And again, that's one of those things that expands your knowledge.
I made fish sauce.
I made pho back before it was cool. Or excuse me, pho. Or whatever you want to call it.
Cool.
The Vietnamese place is pronounced it pho. I know it's really pho, but they pronounced it pho in Corpus and made fun of that. But I made that before it was cool, and now I've got the bowls and everything. So
cool. Anyway. I love this stuff, and I like to cook Asian. You asked what I do cook Italian, but I like to cook Asian food, and I'm not a stickler for authenticity. I mean,
yeah, me neither, especially on Asian food.
Yeah. But I mean, I can visualize that somebody's Chinese grandmother was just like my little Italian grandmother, and they all had recipes, or Vietnamese. I mean, they all, they all had pho recipes, of their own, and that in itself is not quote authentic because it's French, it's Asian, it's Chinese, it's Vietnamese, and they take it and they made something all their own. And I like it almost the same way, except for I'll use udon noodles instead of rice noodles. Well, it's not authentic. I don't care. It tastes great.
Yeah.
One of the things that I enjoy the most about going to the newer Asian places that have opened up around here is that they immediately engage in fusion. They take their recipes, but what peppers are they using? They're using Mexican peppers.
Yeah.
They're using hatch chilies and jalapenos, and you're going, oh, this is good, So yeah, I love the fusion of traditional styles.
Well, the commonality of all of it is one thing that impresses me, because when you actually go to Mexico, you don't see Mexican food, what we call Mexican food.
Yeah, that's true.
It's different. It's a
we have Tex-Mex.
We have Tex-Mex. It's a different animal, and Asian food on the boats was always amazing because we had Filipino crews, we had Chinese crews, we had Indian, we had everything. So I got to eat food what the crew wanted, not what it wasn't made for us. It wasn't restaurant food, and I mean, some of it you couldn't get past your nose, and other times,
one of the best quote unquote Mexican meals I ever had was in a little town down on the Baja Peninsula called Puerto Nuevo. And my uncle took me down there, and you walk into this place, they're bringing in lobsters off the boats.
Yeah.
And you tell them what size lobster you want and what kind of beer you want, and they gave you that lobster and your beer with homemade tortillas and homemade frijoles, and that's totally foreign to anything we would have around here. And I ate myself almost sick. It was all so good.
You know, and something about food that a lot of people kind of overcomplicate things. Oftentimes, the simplest foods are the best. I mean, my favorite Italian dish is I homemade make Italian sausage, and it's kind of a Sicilian American thing, but I don't know where it came from. I knew the recipe came from my uncle and then to my dad, and then I helped my dad, and then I made it, and now my kids make it. But anyway, so we always have homemade Italian sausage on hand. In the my favorite pasta dish is pasta with aglio, which is just pasta with garlic and oil. Mm-hmm. And oil in Italy is olive oil. Well, I mean the oil, and you may notice this, but the olive oil, they have a brand at HEB called Rustico mm-hmm. olive oil, rustic olive oil, and it's Sicilian unfiltered olive oil. Well, it comes from an area around Castelvetrano, which is where my grandparents are from, and so I like that oil especially well, and it's assertive and it's fruity and it's tastes like olives, and so you cook pasta and it can be spaghetti or whatever. Typically we use spaghetti, and you slow cook or like a head of garlic or half a head, however much you can stand, and you mince it and you cook it on low heat because you don't want it to turn brown. You just want it to get soft and fragrant, and then turn the heat off, and you dump that on the pasta and maybe sprinkle a little parsley. Some people, I know some families used to throw a little anchovy in the grease and the hot oil.
Ooh, yeah.
And it would disintegrate.
Yeah.
And,
they just come apart. Yeah.
And it adds a lot of umami flavor. But my parents they just was garlic and oil and a little parsley, and you toss that together and put a little bit of good Parmesan cheese on it, and it's out of this world.
Oh, yeah. Sounds out of this world.
Good carbonara.
My stomach's sitting here growling. You're gonna have to mute this mic anytime I'm not talking to keep my stomach growls out.
Yeah, I had carbonara on a boat one time and learned how to make it, and it's fantastic.
And one more little war story.
Sure.
Okay? And this has to do with my son Michael.
We'll talk all day. I don't want to make you late for your class.
There's no such thing. But when he was in Afghanistan, he was a CV, and he for 20 years in the military. So I mean, he has kind of similar to your Coast Guard experience. And when he was in Afghanistan, he was the only Navy guy. He was deployed when what they call a joint service deal, and all his guys were Army. He wore an Army uniform with Navy insignias on it. So,
yep.
But anyway, he traveled around Afghanistan all over, often by himself, and he would hitch a ride on a helicopter or a convoy going this way or that way, and they would. But when it came lunchtime, he would try to stop with some NATO group, which involved Italians, and he said he kind of avoided the Brits because he said their food sucked. But so he would a lot of times go eat with Italians. He'd show up at their camp at lunchtime, and because he said they had great food.
Yeah,
I mean, and it kind of ties about no matter where you are.
There's this old euphemism that I wish I could remember. It's something like, in heaven, the French are the French are the cooks, the Germans are the engineers, and I can't remember what it is, but then in hell, it's all switched around where where like the British are the cooks and the French are the engineers. And anyway, yeah, that makes total sense to me. That's so fun. That's funny. Well, I probably at one point, I threatened last year. In fact, I told our buddy Bill, I said, man, we put our dog down the summer before this, and this summer, and I had been waiting. She was getting old, and I knew she wasn't going to last too long. And I told Sharon, I said, man, when the dog goes, when we have to finally put the dog down, I want to do a garden in the backyard. And so I started asking Bill all these questions about it. I told him kind of some of the stuff I wanted to cook, and we were talking about what grows out here and what doesn't. And I got all fired up about that, and then this brewery thing happened.
Oof.
And the garden never happened. So now, listening to you talk about the garden and all the stuff you're growing and the food you're making, I'm like, oh, man, I've got to figure out a way to do this next time around.
Okay, next time you guys get together, there are a lot more hobbies to explore.
Oh, yeah. We barely touched the surface.
If you guys, sometimes come over, and when you're over, and just give me a call or shoot me a message and come over and look at.
I would love to.
And
I'd love to.
I can. This is kind of weird. I've kind of become a garden guru, an involuntary garden guru, and I really don't intend to, because I don't make any claims about knowing what the heck I'm doing, but
the results are speaking for themselves.
Exactly.
I belong to a garden group on Facebook called West Texas Vegetable Gardeners, and so the guy that started it asked me if I would be a moderator, and I said, sure. I come on here all the time anyway. It's how I go out in the mornings, I do my garden chores, I water, and I do this, and I go in the house, I'm the typical fool at Facebook. I take pictures of my food, and I take pictures of my garden.
But it's interesting. That's you're far from typical, because it's interesting. Everything that you post.
Yeah. You're not taking pictures of your baby back ribs at Chili's.
Right. Right.
Well, and I belong to another group called Midland Area Foodies, and most of those guys are people that do go out, and their primary interest is in restaurants. Well, I'm the home cook guy.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't hardly. Probably shouldn't say this in public, but I think I cook better than most restaurants. So it's especially here.
I bet you do.
And so I tend to post things on Midland Foodies that's home cooked, food, but it's it's good food. It's like gumbo, like shrimp gumbo. That's my go-to comfort food. And I told you my grandparents grew up in Louisiana. I mean, not grew up, but they settled in Louisiana, and then they moved to Port Arthur, and then eventually moved to Midland, and they drugged those, not only the Italian, but they drugged that Cajun stuff with them.
Oh, yeah.
And
I love that, too.
Let me tell you something. I've eaten gumbo in New Orleans and all these different places, and I'm sorry, but mine's better than any I've ever tasted in a restaurant.
Home cooked.
Sometime maybe I need to do that.
Kind of funny you mentioned gumbo.
Maybe we need to have a luncheon or something, and I could just bring gumbo.
That would be awesome.
Or we can come or cook gumbo.
Yeah,
or something. I mean, it's something you don't get every day, or you see a lot of it. But I tell you what, you see is if you taste the real deal. I mean, and I do speed it up. I mean, my mother used to make stir-roo for 2 hours.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've always heard about that. Yeah.
I mean, but you can make it faster than that. You just got to pay attention. You got to be focused.
At our steward at Lodge last night, Matt and I are Masons, and I went to my lodge last night, and on our second meeting of the month, we have a dinner before Lodge. And I was fully prepared to just skip dinner and get on with the Lodge. We had a busy night. And I walked in, and the steward had made homemade jambalaya. And I was like, yeah, I'm having some of that. So I sat down.
I'll be having a little.
Oh, yeah. And it was really good and really authentic. Very good cook, and he's very good in that Cajun style. And so, yeah, I would be 100% into that.
I'm often accused of sacrilege now. I don't grill steaks anymore. Cast iron in an oven.
That's what we do.
I do that all the time. I mean, I do grill one occasionally, and I have a great Primo grill, one of those ceramic grills, and I love it. And it is so versatile, and you can do some cool things on it. And I cook ribs, and I cook steaks every once in a while. But you know what? More often than not, I cook steak inside.
Perfect steak.
And it's...
especially fillets in a skillet. Sear it and then put it in the oven.
The venison, like we had before the podcast, that's all cast iron.
And finish it off in the oven.
Or the other way, or
right.
Whatever,
and there's, I mean, I have a sous vide thing, and I like to do sous vide, but my favorite thing to do sous vide is fried chicken. Sounds so weird.
I learned about sous vide yesterday, and I watched a video, and I turned it off, and I'm like, okay, I got a few other things to digest before I move into that because because it's amazing.
The first thing they tell you to cook sous vide is a steak.
Yeah.
And it's easy, but it does kind of fit with your deal with the cast iron and all, because you cook the steak raw, or you can brown it first, but usually most sous vide steaks they cook in the sous vide. But the cool thing is that you don't. It's almost impossible to overcook them unless you leave it on there for 2 days.
Right.
I mean, and don't laugh. I have cooked a roast for over 2 days.
Yeah.
You can make a chuck roast have the same consistency as a steak, like a piece of and pink, like a rib roast or a prime rib, and very similar steak like mouth chew or mouthfeel and texture and even taste, and it's tender because all those collagens have now softened up and cooked away, and they're not chewy and tough like they are when they're in. But a sous vide steak's good, but you can cook a pretty good steak without sous vide. I mean, just on a grill and finish it off in the oven and get it right. And that's typically what I do. But because getting all the sous vide stuff, but like making fried chicken, you think, why? What are you thinking? Sous vide fried chicken? I mean, and that's what I thought the first time. And then I saw a video on it, and I thought, that makes perfect sense, because the few times, if you've ever fried chicken, and I know everybody says, well, my grandma's fried chicken was the best fried chicken that ever was. Well, I don't know. Sometimes I question. I mean, I don't want to start a fight, but I'm, your grandmother's chicken was greasy.
Yeah.
I mean, and the reason it is because she had to cook it at a low temperature, because like try frying a chicken leg sometime. What you'll do is if you fry it in really hot grease, like 370, 360, that's what forces the moisture out, and it keeps the oil from soaking into the food. And that's what you get crispy, not greasy food. Problem is, the outside of that chicken and the crust gets done way before the inside of the chicken.
Okay. Yeah.
So you end up with a perfectly cooked chicken leg that's raw inside.
Exactly.
Or you cook it for 20 minutes, and you have to cook it at 300 degrees to keep from incinerating the outside in order to get the heat to penetrate the center. And so you end up with a cooked chicken leg, but it's oily, it's greasy. Yeah. So the way to make that go away is you cook the chicken first. It's sous vide at 155 degrees, and you can put it on in the morning, and you just go off and do your thing. And then when you're ready to make fried chicken, you come and you dump it out into a a plate or something, and then you roll it in buttermilk, and then in seasoned fried chicken, and you set it all out, and you go over there and you fry it at 370 for 5 minutes. And if you want to pan fry it instead of deep frying it,
and just
you just lay it in there where the oil comes about halfway up, a little more maybe. You just lay it in there, cook it 2.5 minutes, flip it over. You cook it. It's your chicken legs now cooked in 5 minutes. So you can cook a dozen chicken legs in the same 20 minutes that it took you to cook 4 the conventional way. And that's the issue. If you crowd it and you put a whole bunch of chicken legs in there, it's going to really be greasy.
Exactly.
And so you cook 3 or 4 legs at a time in the same 20 minutes, and you're not standing over the hot
That's a
grease
good idea.
for
I like that.
4 hours or 3 hours frying, and you set it out, and it's not overdone. The chicken is perfectly moist and tender, and it's cooked.
This is similar to the brining method for chicken, where you soak the chicken in hot brine water for a certain amount of time, and then it partially cooks, and then you bread it in. But this is a better method. I want to try this.
Well,
I'm interested.
When you sous vide, the one thing that you do is you salt the chicken before you tip it. You can do it in a Ziploc bag, or I have back from my hunting and fishing, I have a chamber type vacuum sealer.
Oh, okay.
And so I use all the bags you get for that type of sealer are boil or microwave or freeze or whatever you want to do. And so you can take your chicken and you salt it, and you salt it pretty heavy, and then you vacuum seal it, and the vacuum sealant helps the salt. It makes its own brine.
Okay.
And since it cooks so slow, it makes liquid, and it brines itself in that couple of hours that you're sous vide cooking. So it's kind of like a twin deal. I love brining things. I like brining. Sometimes the things I cook on a grill are a roasted chicken. Well, brine the chicken first, and then, you know, it makes all the difference in the world.
I thought I was going to escape it, but I'm going to wind up buying one of those now.
But I mean, you know, they make some good ones. I mean, there's a real good one that they tout that's, it's got a magnetic base, and you set it, but you have to use your smartphone. It has no manual controls on it.
I was looking up a recipe that I make. I use it's Binging with Babish. I don't know if you've seen his channel. It's amazing. The hands down, my opinion, the best cooking channel there is on YouTube. And he showed a lot of the sous vide stuff, but very traditional sauces and stuff. And I had, in fact, I found him where I had encountered an argument online about carbonara and what's real and what isn't, and how this made it, how he made it, and it was fantastic.
I'm probably a sacrilege when it comes to some things, and one of the things that's Italian that I really don't care for much is the pancetta.
Oh yeah,
which is the Italian sort of bacon, but it's fermented and it's got a funny wang to it that I prefer American bacon.
I've made carbonara with pancetta, and I haven't done it enough. Most of the time that I've made it, I've just had bacon on hand.
Yeah.
So I would just use that, but I'm a firm believer in the full fat mozzarella. Grating that instead of buying the plastic crap that comes in the bag. Just doesn't work. And so that's kind of how some of the things that I've gone in that direction with him. And
there are really some better things. I mean, you know, and like using a better ingredient or something like that. But and maybe it's just because we've grown up eating bacon all the time. I mean, who doesn't like bacon? I mean,
I don't know.
Communists.
Yeah.
I know communists even like bacon.
Yeah. They just can't get it.
I'm pretty sure they probably. But
yeah. If you're interested in communism, watch Yushenka Show. That's another good YouTube channel, and he'll tell you all about Russian bacon and how horrible all that kind of crap is. Oh yeah, he's Yushenka Show is I'll link him. I'll link Babish so everybody can see it.
Cool.
His name is Sergei Sputnikov. If there's not a more perfect name, he is a Ukrainian who he's my age, was raised in Ukraine during the Cold War era, left in the 90s, and his channel is all about growing up in Soviet Ukraine.
Right.
And he has that deadpan Russian delivery, Soviet delivery on everything that he does. He's fantastic. But gentlemen, it's time for lunch, and my voice is giving out. I don't want you to miss ceramics. We will do this again. John Cappadonna and Tim Kreitz.
Hey.
Cheers.
Enjoyed it, guys.
My coffee cup's empty, but cheers, boys. See you next time.
We're going to watch you lick the bottom of the cup.